I'm today going to focus on China and the latest population problems they are having. China, as you know, just a short time back, was the most populous country in the world with 1.4 billion people. It still has 1.4 million people, but this year the census has shown that the population has gone down by about 800,000. This is the first time in the history of China that the population has gone down. But this has having ominous portents for the future and for the Chinese industry and the Chinese state. Now, how did this come about is also worth studying. In the early 60s, when Mao Zedong held full sway over China, he was of the view that one of the problems which the Chinese have is their excessive population, which must be controlled. He was taking example of Japan, which has a constricted population, a population that is controlled, and the Japanese have been having a static population about 100 million for a long time. So they formed a policy, that is the Communist Party, and they began to enforce it ruthlessly, that you will have only one child. This is called the one child policy, which was set up in China. Well, it continued for 60 years, and the Chinese people got used to having just one child. It had its repercussions, but the Communist Party, which was in power in China, ignored all this, and the net result was that fewer babies were being born in China, while the health facilities improved in China, and the average age of the population began to go up, and more people began to live longer. So, what has happened after 2015? The Chinese noted an imbalance that the population was getting aged. There were more aged people all around, and younger people not available to the work. Now, this has got tremendous consequences. Consequences for the gender ratio as well. Because in China, there's a peculiar fetish. One could say it's ingrained in the Chinese people, like in almost all the Southeast Asian nations, including India, where the preference is for a son. And if you're going to have only one child, and everybody would prefer that they have a son. And there was no restriction on getting abortions done. And normally, the girl child fetus was aborted, and only sons were being born. With the result, there was an imbalance, and the girls were not available. And even where the sons were born, there was only one son available, and that was going to have disastrous consequences. The consequences were like this. The first thing was that the younger people not available for work. Number two, because of the imbalance in the female male ratio, women were not available for marriage. And there have been reports that the Chinese men would go to Pakistan to get the Muslim women and marry them. But when these Muslim women came there, they were treated very badly, and the Pakistan government had to think twice about it. A third, more important thing was that the liability of the older generation began to grow. When you have to look after them, give them food, medicine, and other things. And the workforce which has to produce this began to go down. It's not available. And this one son syndrome, I will say that the fetish for a one son syndrome had a disastrous consequence for the Chinese army as well. Now, just understand, if you have one son only and he's the scion of your family who has to carry your dynasty forward, your family forward, what happens if that man is sent into the army and he goes and dies there? What happens? So, when I was working where I was in Singapore, I found that I had a Chinese whose son was in the army. He was very frightened. He said, I don't know, sir, what's going to happen. Because in case anything happens to him, he dies, my family will die. I'll have no inheritor to pass on anything further. So the Chinese conscripts who go and join the army are not ready to die. And that is one of the reasons, in my assessment, the Chinese army suspect. And tomorrow they launch an invasion, whether of Taiwan and any other place, is not going to be honky dory for them. It's not going to be honky dory, sir. I can tell you that. It's going to be pretty difficult. Chinese won't be knowing what to do after that because the morale problem is very big, and no army can fight if it doesn't have the morale. Now, China is in a peculiar situation, and the economy, which was always moving at 8 to 10% a year, has started tanking. Chinese invested in massive cities, converting villages with skyscrapers, and now what's happened? Those skyscrapers and villages are empty. There are no buyers. Nobody can go and see because the economy. I mean, a man when he become older, he like to relax. I mean, stay in his own place, in his own house. He's not interested in investing things, going and doing things because the spirit of adventure does go down with age. You expect an 85-year-old man or 75 to go and do investing something, and this is what's happened because China has got an aging population now. And now the Communist Party has woken up to this fact, and they did withdraw that policy a few years back. But then, the people have got used to a good life economically. China has got a per capita income all 5 to 6 times that of India, and people want to live a better life. They feel that if they are going to have children, it's not going to help them to live a life of enjoyment because the responsibility will increase. So the population has still not picked up. Children are still, the couples are still having one child, and that is continuing. It'll take at least a decade or two before it can change, and there has to be tremendous incentive. But then what has been done has been done. And this is not peculiar to just this. The Chinese at every stage have bungled badly. If you remember, Mao Zedong had decided that he wanted to have more steel being made in China compared to America. So every house in the village was told to open a small smelter and start making steel there. Net result was agriculture suffered and there was a famine. And as per the reports which I have, almost 10 million people died of the famine in China. And all credit should go to Mao Zedong, and yet we find that his body lies in state in the mausoleum in Beijing. I think if there was anybody who could be a greater butcher in the world, it is none other than Mao Zedong. Then he had the Red Guard revolution coming in which the Red Guards, who had the Red Book of Mao Zedong, they went around and they would just pick up anybody XYZ as an enemy of the state, have a trial, and sentence him to imprisonment or something like that. So it was a state of anarchy, which really ended only once Mao went from this world, I think in 1973 or something. But at that time, he had enough damage to China. He enforced so many things which continued, and it to the credit of Deng, who came later, who was a more pragmatic man, that China began to move forward. And in this movement forward, bear in mind the hand of the United States. I have never been able to understand what really prompted the Americans to put all their eggs in the basket of China. It was Richard Nixon who made the trip to China, threw in the towel, paid obeisance to the Emperor Mao Zedong, like in the old days when China was a middle kingdom. These are very, very important points because China would not have reached the present stage without investment of billions of dollars from America, without the high-tech trade and technology being transferred to China. Even the Wuhan laboratory, as per reports, which really brought about the COVID virus into the world, had received grants from America worth thousands of dollars. So America doesn't know who are their friends, who are their enemies. They keep on barging about Russia, but they forgot that they had the biggest enemy in the East. Now, China is an enigma. It's got a problem with almost all the countries of the world. I don't think there's any country in which they don't have a problem other than Russia, but that is only simmering at the moment. It'll erupt anytime because there are lots of areas which the Russians have taken during the time of the Tsar, which the Chinese are not very happy about. They're not happy about the border with India. They're not happy about Formosa being there. They're not happy about the militarization of Japan. They're not happy of the North Koreans. They had a war with them and suffered a defeat. And then they're not happy about the South Koreans with the Americans have got 50,000 troops. They're not happy about the South China Sea, though the Americans gave them everything lock, stock, and barrel and withdrew this fleet from the South China Sea. But now things are changing, and America realized they committed a mistake. But all that is part of the game. The crux of the issue is the population of China, because this is directly related to productivity, and productivity leads to affluence, more money for the people. If you don't have a workforce of the requisite caliber to deliver the goods, I do not see how the Chinese economy can move forward. So, gentlemen, the point at issue is the Chinese policy of restricting children, and this has boomeranged on them very badly. I wish they had thought about it a little earlier, maybe two or three decades earlier. Things wouldn't have been as bad as they are now. And now there is something else which is gripping China, and that is the COVID virus. It is the old saying, it's the birds that come home to roost. China was the country which went and brought this virus into the world by mistake or anyway else. That's why I will say it is a Wuhan virus. And the net result is the virus has been eradicated from the world by and large, but it's come back to China in a different strain. And once more, there are thousands who have died. But this time, the Chinese are a little wary, the government, and they have not enforced that strict lockdown which they used to have earlier, because that had a deleterious effect on the Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is now growing just about 5%, or 4 to 5%, which is the lowest. And it'll probably keep going lower and lower. China, gentlemen, we must remember, is not an ogre, and it has to be dealt with in a different manner. At the same time, once the Americans have built up China, it is a superpower. It's the second biggest economic power in the world. But all these things could come to zero if the population imbalance is not solved. China has two major problems. There is an imbalance in the man woman ratio, one, lesser younger men are available for work, and thirdly, there is a moral problem with the one son syndrome. We'll have to keep watching how China faces its future. I will close now, gentlemen, and wish you all the best. Do subscribe to my channel, share with it. I look forward to interacting with you again. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and God bless.